Hello, Missouri Realtors. Your voice is a powerful one, and hundreds of voices show our collective strength and demonstrate that the Realtor Party stands strong in our state capital. We're really excited to have you in Jefferson City on April 24th for our 39th annual Capitol Conference. It's going to be different than anything we've ever done before because we have so many new things arranged for you that are going to make it much more exciting and interactive than we believe it's been in many years. If you haven't been here before, I'm standing in front of the Missouri Realtors Jefferson City office. This is our advocacy office where our lobbyists work, and this is the headquarters for Capitol Conference. If you have any questions, we hope you'll stop by this office. You can also register here, which I'll tell you more about in just a minute. But this office is directly across from the Capitol on the very, very busy Jefferson and High Street corner. Our schedule for Capitol Conference is 11:30 to 5:30 registration here at our Jefferson City office. Buses will begin to depart the Holiday Inn Executive Center in Columbia at 11:30 a.m. and they'll depart every 15 minutes until 12:30 p.m. We will have boxed lunches provided on each of the buses. Briefings will begin here in Jefferson City at noon and run until 2 on the half hour. They'll be held next door to our Missouri Realtors office at Revel. We then have the afternoon reserved for Capitol visits from 1 to 5. But those of you who end early, we've arranged for a Missouri Realtor open house at the Governor's Mansion from 2:30 to 5. We hope that you'll stop by, have some coffee, tea, water, or some cookies and enjoy a little time to relax in the Governor's Mansion. Then at 5 p.m., our first ever Missouri Realtors block party, and there will be food and drink for all of you for 2 hours from 5 to 7. And then at 7 p.m., the buses will begin to return to Columbia. We can't wait to have you here for all that fun. But now, why don't you go back in the office with me and we'll start briefing on the issues. So now we're going to brief you on some of the issues, and I have with me Sam Lichtleiter, who is our chief lobbyist. Sam, thank you.
Hi, John.
It's great to be here in Jefferson City with you and see all of the activity that's happening. And I know our members are eager to be briefed on these very important issues. One thing I wanted to point out is that there are hundreds of issues that you follow over the course of a legislative session, but during the short time that realtors are here on April 24th, you've had to choose 3 or 4 issues that they can make the most impact on at that point of the legislative session. So now moving on to the talking points that all of you will take with you to the Capitol, let's ask Sam about immunity from liability. That's something that's familiar to us because it was a talking point last year.
Yes.
Fill us in on where we are with that.
The immunity piece, in other words, you are immune from liability if when you take a listing, you get the square footage or area information from another, you disclose that, who you got it from on the listing, they cannot come back and then litigate against you. All arose from some litigation in the St. Louis area, but it is an important issue because what you're going to have to do if we get it passed, and I think we've got a shot here, at least one portion. There are 2 different bills, but if you list the name of the entity where you receive the information. Now, if you do your own measuring, you're doing your own measuring and you're going to accept the liability. Senate Bill 36 has passed the Senate 28-4. It is in the House. It has not been assigned to committee yet. House Bill 106 is out of committee. It went through the House Committee on Judiciary, where I thought it belonged, frankly. And it will be heard in the Rules Committee and then come out to vote. The sponsor of that bill, 106, is Realtor Representative Cody Smith. The sponsor of Senate Bill 36 is Senator Jeannie Riddle. 36 is a little different because 36, if you get the information from yourself or from the owner, you still have liability.
Another issue that our members are very familiar with is the low-income housing tax credit, because we've been talking about that for a while and we've been a champion of that program. Talk to us about where we stand with that in this session.
Missouri Realtors was the first organization that supported low-income housing tax credits back in the 90s. I won't say that we invented them, we didn't. But we certainly picked up and ran with it when some other people came over and said, hey, this is what we think is a good idea. We have two bills, one, Senate Bill 28, which was introduced by Senator Dan HEGEMAN. It passed the Senate, and I didn't believe it until I saw it, 31-0. And if you had any idea the problems that we've had in the past with the Senate and LIHTC, you too would be astonished. It is set right now at 72.5% of the federal tax credit. The federal tax credit right now is $160 million. There is another bill, House Bill 665, by Representative David Gregory from the St. Louis area. And it was heard in the House Committee on Economic Development. It has not been voted on. I know the chairman is looking to make some changes. We have promised to work with the chairman to come together with some changes that make sense. I think we've got a good shot at getting this program revitalized. Governor Greitens, of course, stopped the program back in 2017. We have had no credit, no state credits issued. Governor Parson, when he came in, said, you know what, there need to be some reforms. And I think we can agree that there do need to be some reforms. It's just a question of which ones. I think lowering it is a reasonable reform. There are some other things that we can do. But the important thing is to get this vital program going again, because the waiting lists are not getting any shorter.
For a lot more information on low-income housing tax credits, let's hear from Dr. Jeff Smith.
Jeff, can you give me the background on this program? Why?
Sure. The program actually originated back in the 1980s. Over the course of the 60s and 70s and early 80s, when the federal government took care of pretty much all public housing, they built a lot of high-rise projects in cities throughout the country. Those, in large part, were a failure. When they had to be torn down, most of them, they left thousands of people displaced and homeless. And so Jack Kemp, then a congressman from Buffalo, and President Ronald Reagan came in with a free market solution to the problem, the low-income housing tax credit. That brought private capital and market discipline into affordable housing to incentivize private and nonprofit developers to come in and fill this huge gap in the country and provide affordable housing in exchange for tax credits that paid out over a decade. So the roots of the program are in the 1980s. It's been one of the most successful public-private partnerships really in modern American political history. In fact, when the federal government embarked upon tax reform in 2017, the only program that was set aside as being off the table for any cuts was the low-income housing tax credit, because of its tremendous bipartisan support in Washington and throughout the country. And so it was certainly a little bit surprising in Missouri over the last couple of years to see former Governor Greitens come out and freeze the tax credit program. And that's why we're here in Jefferson City this session, is to try to resurrect the program after the freeze that the previous governor put on it.
How does it work? Why does it work? You said it's a free market system. Can you describe how the program is put together?
Sure. The reason, I think the central reason that it works so well is that it takes risk off of taxpayers and puts risk onto the private sector. And it does that in a unique way. There's a competitive bidding process that applicants go through. People apply to every state housing finance agency around the country. In Missouri, there are usually about 100 to 130 applications bidding for about 20 to 30 tax credit awards. So it's very competitive, and that ensures that there's not too much fat in any of these projects, that the costs stay down. Once the credits are awarded, they pay out over 10 years, but they can't pay out until a project is totally built and fully occupied, 100% leased up to qualifying tenants. Then it doesn't pay out all at once, but it pays out over a 10-year credit period. And since the construction, deal closing, construction, and lease up takes about 3 years, add that to the 10-year credit period, it means that the credit isn't fully redeemed for about 13 years. And over that time, developers and property managers have to comply fully with a rigorous set of regulations, and that ensures that the program is operating in a way that is compliant with all federal and state requirements. So all the risk is on private investors who bid for these, who pay for these tax credits. Okay, the developer gets the tax credit award, an investor then buys the credits from the developer to fund the upfront costs of construction. Once the building, again, is fully leased up, then those credits can be redeemed over the course of a decade, and that means that any developer is accountable to those investors who's ensuring that the property operates in accordance with regulations.
You know, if you'd listen to some people, it was just pretty simple. They just give the developer a bag of money and walk away. And you're telling me there's a lot of oversight in this program.
There's a ton of oversight. You know, we've had some tax credit programs in the state of Missouri that have gone awry. We had the famous MAMTech, tax credit where the
sucralose.
Exactly, where they were going to, invent a new type of sweetener, and the guy ran away with millions of dollars. That can never happen with the low-income housing tax credit. It can't happen with public money because the money that comes into the project to fund construction is all private money, and it's not till, again, on the back end, slowly over a course of 10 years, that any public dollars flow once we've ensured that a development is appropriately built, maintained, and managed.
Now, some have said that we don't need the program. What's your response to people that say, we've had it a long time, is there anybody left?
Well, I've got a few responses. The first one is that demand has never been higher for affordable housing throughout the state. The Missouri Workforce Housing Association that I lead, we have about 190 different organizations as members. And a survey, not of all of those members, but of a few dozen of those members, has shown us that there's over 100,000 people right now on a wait list for affordable housing somewhere in Missouri. This cuts across all regions. It's in St. Louis and Kansas City, but it's also in rural Missouri. It's in northeast Missouri, southeast Missouri, southwest. And so it's an issue that knows no geographic bounds. So that's the first argument I'd make. The second argument for why we need it is that it actually saves money to the state on a different side of the ledger. And that's because about half of all tax credit units go to seniors, and about another 15 to 20% go to people with special needs. Many of those people, nearly half of them, would otherwise be in a Medicaid-funded nursing home unit. That would cost taxpayers 4 to 5 times more than they pay for a LIHTC unit. And it would be an open-ended commitment that doesn't result in a long-term state asset, a 30-year deed-restricted, well-built, multifamily affordable housing development. So there's a lot of different reasons that this is an effective program, but one of the reasons that's most overlooked is that it diverts a lot of people from assisted living facilities that would cost taxpayers much more in the long run than a LIHTC unit.
One last thing, who qualifies for these? Who can get in them? And for example, let's talk about the low-income elderly stuff.
So about half of all people in LIHTC units are low-income seniors who are on Social Security. Predominantly that is the bulk of their income. Another group that's a big beneficiary of this program are formerly homeless veterans who find a home for the first time or again in a LIHTC development. There are facilities specifically designed for veterans in Kansas City, the St. Michael's Veterans Center in St. Louis, Freedom Place, the Salvation Army has another facility in St. Louis, other veterans facilities in Columbia, in Mexico, Missouri, so there's several of them. There are also a lot of facilities specially designed for people with physical or mental health impairments or other types of challenges. And then, of course, there are developments for people in the workforce who are struggling to make ends meet, making $10, $11, $12 an hour, can't afford a safe, decent apartment except through the low-income housing tax credit. Most low-income housing tax credit units rent for an average of around $300 less than market rate. That's what allows the workforce in places like Branson, where there's a huge need for affordable housing, to help provide job growth. You know, with all the people who are cleaning hotel rooms, waiting on tables in tourist centers like Branson, they need a place to live. They can't live an hour away. And because rents have risen in Taney County, there's a desperate need for more affordable housing. So those are the types of populations that the LIHTC program serves.
So, Jeff, we're going to have realtors in the Capitol. What should their ask be to their member of the General Assembly?
Their ask should be to resurrect the low-income housing tax credit program, a program that was frozen, that's been frozen for a couple years. As that program has been frozen, wait lists have been exploding throughout the state. And the only way to help people get off those wait lists into safe, decent, affordable housing is to get this program started again. That means people should be supporting Senate Bill 28. It passed unanimously in the Senate. The Missouri Senate, it's not unlike the Senate in Washington, D.C. There's not a lot of things that you could get Ted Cruz and Cory Booker to agree on in Washington. Well, there's not a lot that you get Senator Jamila Nasheed and Senator Andrew Koenig on the right to agree on in Missouri. But we did. We got a unanimous vote out of the Senate to get this program back up and running, and we hope that the House follows suit and supports Senate Bill 28.
I hope they do too, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sam, I was in a meeting recently with the Secretary of State who had very strong feelings about e-notary legislation. Why don't you fill us in on where we are at this point in the legislative session?
Well, Secretary Ashcroft does have very strong feelings. His office has been working very hard to deal not only with e-notary, but with the entire notarization process. There are two bills that have been introduced at his request. There is another bill that is introduced at the request of some of the title underwriters and insurance companies. There is a little bit of tension between the Secretary's office and some of the title companies and the title underwriters about where you should cite the rules on what sort of material you have to have in order to do e-notarization. In other words, is it really the person that they say they are? We have testified in favor of all bills to the extent that we believe some form of e-notarization is absolutely critical for the industry.
We have this additional information for you on e-notary as well.
Yeah, we looked at the notary statute, and it really hasn't been updated for 50 years. And we realized that having to be right next to someone in their physical presence was sometimes an impediment to making business work. And we have this thing called the internet. We have cameras, and we can project video. And we said, how can we make it easier for individuals to make business transactions, financial transactions happen? And we can do that using technology to allow people, if they want to use the old in-person notary, but also to use remote and electronic notary, just trying to get the government out of people's way.
That's a great idea. Now, there are some people who are concerned that the factors for proving that somebody is somebody are not in the statute, and that's the only way I can describe it. What's your response to that?
Well, we haven't really updated the notary laws for 50 years. If we put in our technology requirements and put them into statute and wait 50 years to come back to them, I think everyone watching this video can understand that technology has changed in the last 50 years, and we need to make sure that we can have the necessary certifications and criteria to keep everything as secure as possible. In fact, if we do it correctly, it will be more secure than the old-fashioned in-person notary.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense, because I think we've all seen the fast expansion of technology, and it's one of those things that I now have to go to my grandchildren and ask them to explain it to me.
Yeah, and what is secure now will not be secure in 10 years because technology will have changed, computational power will have changed, and what is possible now, or what is impossible now, will be possible in 10 years. So we don't want to put it into statute. We want to put it into rules so that we can change it as necessary, and also so that we can have input of the people that will use it. That's very important. Once it's in statute, it's very difficult to change it. But if it's in rules, then we can have consortiums of people that are interested come and discuss with us the best way forward to make sure that it works for everyone involved.
That makes just a mammoth amount of sense. I'm just real confused now as why everyone is, or not everyone, but some folks are getting so angsty about the whole thing. I guess it's change, and nobody likes change.
I think that you've hit the nail right on the head. I think that people like what they're used to, and some other states have done putting things in statute, and we've tried to look at what other states have done in the last 2 or 3 years and said, okay, we don't want to make the mistakes that Nevada made. We see some problems with the way it was implemented in Texas. North Carolina has some good ideas, but some things that don't work well in Missouri. So we really like the idea of being able to use those people that were the very front end of it and say, let's do things a little bit differently that we think will be better long term, and not only work for Missouri, but work for the states around us, so there can kind of be a regional approach to the notary process, which I think is also helpful to all the shareholders.
Yeah, I'm familiar a little bit with the problems with paper. We sold some property a few years ago in Colorado, and I think FedEx made the most on the deal.
Well, and it's not just what we're doing to remote electronic notarization. We're doing some changes from the legal standpoint to make sure that if a word means one thing for in-person notarization, it's a similar or the exact same thing, so it's easier from a legal standpoint to understand terminology, to have more defined terms. And we're also trying to strengthen the ability, if there is a problem, if there is an issue with the notarization or the notary of the document, we're more stringently having requirements on the record of that notarial act, so that if things do come up, even if it's the old-fashioned style of notarization, that we have good evidence to make a determination as to what did happen and what should happen to make things right.
That's an excellent point, because I know notaries leave, they pass away, and the books are sometimes lost.
They are, and not every notarial act is put down in the journal. And one of the things that we think is that we'd like to close those gaps and those loopholes so that when a document is notarized, there's a notation in that journal. So if there is a problem in the future, it's not just someone trying to remind themselves from a vague memory 10 years ago, but they actually have in writing, this is what happened.
I think that's a great idea. The more I look at it, the more convinced I become that your approach is the correct one. It makes a whole lot of sense to me, and I think to everyone else, hopefully.
Well, that's what we're hoping for. That's why we reached out to, I don't know, 10, 20 different stakeholders from every different area, realtors, mortgage bankers, title companies, car dealers, bar association, you name it, to get them to the table before we had written the language, so that we wouldn't get too far down the road, and make sure that everyone's needs and concerns were addressed, so that we could have something that maybe wouldn't be 100% perfect for any one person, but it would at least meet 98% for everyone, so we could all move forward in concert.
Yeah, I remember one of those meetings, at least. I was sort of in the middle of the table there.
It was good. Yeah. And it's what we need to do more on legislation, getting people together before the words are down on paper, and seeing what we can do together to make it work, and I would hope we'll continue to do that in other areas.
Thank you to Sam and all of our guests today for this briefing. We hope that these legislative updates have given you the information that you need to be successful on your Hill visits. And if you have interest in other issues beyond the few issues we've been able to cover today, under legislative updates in the advocacy section of our website, we have our general policies guide. These are all of the policy positions that our advocacy committee has taken over the years that have then been approved by our executive committee and our board of directors. But as I mentioned earlier, when you're in town for this key moment in the legislative session, we have to distill our talking points down to the 3 or 4 issues that we know you can make the greatest impact this day. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the Capitol.